I will be using a Daiichi 1160. It's a hook that's rounded. I'll show you that in just a moment. And I'll be tying it in a size 12 tonight. Again, I'll use Danville thread. In the back is foam, some 2mm foam. As I mentioned, the dubbing, this time I'll be using Spirit River. The hackle tips, I'll share that in just a moment. I'll have hackle of black, which imitates some of the legs. We'll use some more foam and dubbing for the front part of the body. So here is the is the fly looking straight down, and you notice the wings, and that's just using. I have a saddle hackle here it happens to be Collins hackle, but at the very bottom, you'll notice these feathers. And they're kind of rounded. My guess is you might be able to find something similar, perhaps in a hen neck. But I looked at these. This is just a medium done saddle. And so what I'm doing is taking these out. I select 2 of them, and I measured to length. Carefully pull the barbules back, and that's going to be a wing. Now the trick is trying to get those to lay how you want them. The rachis on this particular batch of feathers is more rounded than most, and as I tie it in, you might notice that it slips from one side to the other, and unfortunately I'll probably end up demonstrating that. But here's the hook, the Daiichi, and you notice how curved it is. I'll start my thread and we'll go down around. And in this particular fly, I tied a dozen of them, half a dozen in size 10, half a dozen in size 12. And I noticed on some of them I didn't go down around the hook far enough, so that's why I suggest always tying a few at a time. Get my materials out here again. As I mentioned, I just take some 2mm black foam. I'm just going to create a point. And the reason I cut it like this, so I don't have as much bulk when I tie it in. I'll tie it on top of the hook, and I'll kind of spiral it up so I can manage the foam, and then you can go back and tie it down, secure it, and make sure that it's secure back here, because as you apply the dubbing and you pull it forward, you'll notice that this starts to creep forward. So that's always a good sign. I pull back down and make sure that my that I've got that secure. And that happens a lot. So in a lot of flies, as you start to tie something, you bring it forward, push this forward, push whatever material you have so it folds over, and if you don't secure it or tie it down far enough, then you'll end up perhaps tying it a little bit farther up the hook than what you actually intended to. As I mentioned, we'll be using some caddis Nymph UV2 Spirit River, and this is black again, so I'll pull a little bit of that out. And I'm not going to create a bulbous body, I just want to create a little bit of bulk for the underbody. And this dubbing, I just feel it now, and it seems a lot finer than the Renee Harrop dubbing. Again, as I mentioned, I don't know that it's good or bad, it's just different. So I'll take my dubbing, make sure that it's tight down there at the tie-in point of the foam, and we'll just make the constant underbody. And I'll highlight this. There's a piece of the dubbing that looks like a little bit of a ball here, and that isn't going to dub very well. So you'll see that in some of the dubbings, and just throw that away. Don't even try to manage with it. I'll use just a little bit more. And I'm just eyeballing this. As I mentioned, I haven't tied a lot of these. I'm anxious to give it to actually fish it. And I'll pull this forward. Keep it taut with your one hand and take your thread around with the other hand, and then pull. And then we'll take a few more securing wraps, and then I come underneath and I'm going to spiral that forward a little bit too. I found that just having a little bit more bulk in this section will help as I finish or go to the next step. I'm just going to cut the edges off on the foam. And the other thing I found is that if I were to tie the wings in right now, the amount of space between this section of body that I just had versus the rounded, it will cause that wing to really stick straight up. So I want to create more, a thicker midsection in here that allows the wings to sit a little bit flatter on the body. So we'll dub that as well. So it provides two things. It provides a little bit more bulk, and it also allows a little bit softer area when I actually put the apply the wings, that it will seat better. I'm just going to cut off these longer sections of dubbing. And now you'll notice that I have two feathers that I've already prepared. So I've taken these barbules off, and I'll go back to that original feather. And I take both of the feathers at the same time, lay them over the top, so they're both exactly the same size, and I'll hold on and I'll just pull those barbules off. And that's how I created these feathers. So I'm going to I'll line the tips again so they're pretty close. Actually, I don't need to do that since I've taken them. I'm just going to cut these off. And since I tie them in one at a time, it doesn't make any difference whether I lined them or not. So, and as I position the wings, I want a little bit of the barbules to tie down, but not too many. So this is where I'll adjust them a tiny bit. And then I hold them to about what I feel is the right proportion. Again, I use my thumb and forefinger and the hook just to anchor that. And then I'll take my other thumb and just hold it. And make sure you're tying with a flat thread, and you can use a soft wrap. Take a couple of wraps, and then we'll see how that looks. And see how it's twisted off to the side. So I'm glad it did that. Not really, but it shows you how sometimes they're just a little bit tougher. You might think, for some of you experienced fly tyers, that if you use some pliers and crimp the rake as it flattens it, but in this particular case, I've not had it do that. So this is just an obstinate feather. And then I take both hands and I'll just slightly pull the feather in. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's some barbules that are tied under the thread. So that I'll use that for my first wing, and we'll do the same thing on the other side. I'm using the shiny side up. Take a couple of loose wraps, and then as I can adjust it, I'll push the wing away from me a little bit and pull at the same time. And you can manipulate them with your fingers a little bit. Push them off to one side or the other. And honestly, there's two things you're tying for. One is for the fish and one is for the fly tyer, or the fly fisherwoman. So I think when a fish hits that, it's going to mess it up anyway a little bit, so it probably won't matter. But it matters to me when I tie it. So I'll hold these, and now I'll crimp down on some of those, and we'll trim the butt ends of those hackles. I don't have a really good proportion of what I used for the body. I just tied something that looks good. But this next section I just wanted to show you is a little bit skinnier. So for the top section, we're going to cut this as well. And the other trick I'll show you is that this is 2mm foam, but if you compress it with your thumb and forefinger, it actually it collapses some of that, and it's easier to tie in. So I'm going to tie it in and go back with open wraps, and I want to end where the tie-in point for where those wings are. Ultimately, I'm going to pull this forward. So I want to make sure that I have enough strong wraps back here that when I pull it forward, I don't pull it, there wouldn't be any gaps. Let's see, I've got some hackle now that I'll put in. And a little bit of dubbing. This will just smooth out everything. And now I'll take some open wraps of hackle. I think it twisted on me. Again, I tie my hackle off, put the thread, open it up, and I don't bind down as many barbules that way. Trim the hackle, and we will continue to trim. I just open up my scissors, come straight down, and I will trim out the top section because I don't need any of that. We'll pull the foam forward, and I'll put a little bit of pressure on it. And with my offhand, my other hand, I'm pulling tightly, and then as I pull down on the thread, I create a really nice taper for the head. And then we'll whip finish in front, just behind the eye. I pull this forward and trim it, and then I'll trim off each side to have a little bit smaller head. And then the last thing I'll do, turn it upside down, open up my scissors, come straight down, and that's how I create a V, so it sits a little bit lower in the water. And I will give that a try and report back on my RiverKeeper Fly website at some point. But that's a fly net.